Well, everybody outside of China wants to get a piece of this huge
Yeah.
market. And the surprising fact is that China is very complicated. It's not easy. Chinese have done business for millennia. It's almost in their DNA.
Dear Harvey, thank you very much for having this interview with us, this discussion with us. We're super excited to talk to you about the most current affairs as far as EU, US, and China are concerned. Harvey Dzodin has worked in the Carter administration and was a vice president of the ABC TV network for many years. He currently is a senior fellow of think tank Center for China and Globalization, and he has agreed to talk to us about the most pressing issues at the moment, which are, of course, the US-China Alaska Summit and the comprehensive agreements, and also, of course, all the other topics that are important now. Harvey, welcome.
Thanks very much, Emmy. I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for this great opportunity.
So, yeah, welcome. Let us know a little bit, what is your current position and what is your interest in EU-China relations?
Well, I always tell people when they ask me what my current position is, and tell them that it's tenuous because you never know. Well, I'm currently living in beautiful and historic Vienna, once the capital of a great empire like Beijing has become once again. I'm interested not only in Sino-EU relations, but Sino-US relations, and actually in the importance of the triangle of the US-EU-China relations. It's the new paradigm of our time.
Definitely. I think we can all feel that, especially after this Thursday and Friday and the weekend with all the discussions about the summit. So, yeah, what are currently the most important events for China watchers?
Well, one of them, in a way, is unfolding now because Secretary of State Blinken is meeting in Europe at the NATO summit, and then we'll meet with EU officials and with the Belgian Prime Minister. Those will be very important sessions because Biden's model, the Biden doctrine, is not to go it alone like Trump unsuccessfully tried to do, but to get a coalition of the willing to work together on many issues, especially confronting China. And so the meetings this week in Europe are part of that effort. But other things that are important that have occurred recently are China's so-called two sessions, which concluded a few weeks ago. The National People's Congress and its highest level advisory committee. Recently, we also did emerge from this very contentious 2+2 high-level summit between China and the US in Alaska that was full of fireworks, divisions. There was the Quad meeting of US, Australia, India, and Japan just before that. This week, there's also a meeting in China between China and Russia and the foreign ministers of both countries. And that's very important to watch because as the US builds its alliance with its allies, China and Russia are the countervailing weights, I guess you could say. And also, I think another important thing for people who are interested in China and in world affairs is that China recently realized its age-old dream of eliminating extreme poverty. In fact, it's amazing that they've lifted about 850 million people out of poverty.
Wow, that's really impressive. So I can say that a lot is going on, especially as refers to Chinese development in general and also the geopolitical developments of the whole world. So maybe let's start with the first one. Let's start with China itself. What, from your perspective, are the outcomes of the 14th five-year plan? What are the most important points, also especially for companies, of course, state level and the interested public? How will that influence relations between EU, China, and the US?
Wow, that is a lot
Or maybe
to
just
answer.
just just
So if you give me a few minutes, I'm going to try my best to go through all that, okay? But it is very important, actually. Okay, well, the National People's Congress reviewed and approved the 14th five-year plan. The five-year plan is China's compass, its management tool for goal setting and target measuring. It seems that everyone, however, has a misconception about it, that the five-year plan is a top-down affair. But while that might have been the case in the USSR and in China's early Maoist days, that's not the case anymore. The five-year plan is a several-year-long process where all stakeholders have numerous opportunities online and offline to provide input and to help decision makers. The bottom line for the next 5 years, Emi, is that China plans to move up the value chain from quantity manufacturing to quality manufacturing.
Yeah.
They're looking at how to build better and at higher levels of complexity. So there will be a concentration in R&D, not only for general manufacturing, but AI, quantum computing, space and deep sea exploration, robotics, and the like. China has been building by spending lavishly in this 21st century on R&D, and they plan to continue it with a 7% annual increase. That's more than the previous five-year plan.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the century, China decided that to become a global innovation leader, they had to invest big in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, of course. In fact, as a result, China contributed a third of all global R&D spending growth since 2000, compared with 20% for the US and even less for Europe.
Yeah, we know
It's
that
no
in
wonder.
Europe, we know that in Europe, R&D spending is really, let's say, not the biggest part of the budget of the governments, which is incredible. If you have a look at the Chinese increase, I mean, it's impressive.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And it's really important if the West, let's say, call it the West, if the West wants to compete with China and even to catch up with China, they have to make the same investments.
Yeah.
In America during the Trump years, it seemed like it was a joke that almost every day someone talked about building back American infrastructure. And that meant not only roads and highways and bridges, but it also means building the infrastructure for the future, which is technological in nature. And the US hasn't done it yet. There has been talk that the US will make this a priority, but it's going to take a hell of a lot of money. And the question is whether or not the Republicans are going to be able or willing to spend this much money. When President Trump was in office, they were willing to spend whatever it took, whatever President Trump asked for. But now suddenly they've gotten their fiscal conservatism back, and anything that Biden asks for, it's always going to be too much.
Yeah. So definitely losing competitiveness as far as I can see. Especially,
Yeah,
we know that
absolutely.
especially R&D expenditure is the one thing that aims to the future. I mean, it's the best and the most direct investment into the future. And we can see that China is really good with that. So we spoke about the R&D. What else is there in the five-year plan? What can we expect for the next years? I mean, are they just gonna study, or what else is planned?
No, this is an action plan. So you can already see the results in another way too. China has established itself as a top-level global innovator. It leads all other countries in the three types of intellectual property filings, patents, trademarks, and industrial designs for the first time. China also has developed 17 of the top global science and technology innovation clusters, with Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou cluster, and Beijing area being ranked second and fourth, respectively, by the World Intellectual Property Organization, agency of the UN. So another very important element of the 14th five-year plan is the dual circulation model introduced by the Chinese president last year. People mistakenly think it's designed to create only domestic demand and production and self-reliance and supply chain independence at the expense of excluding external economic actors. I don't think that's quite the case. I look at it as win-win. For example, to achieve its goals, China will need to and have to welcome both foreign investment and goods and services to contribute to China's enhanced economic future as put forth in the 14th five-year plan. And since that is so technologically oriented, Europe and US, at least in the near term, have a role to play that China at this point will welcome.
Mm-hmm. So if you can just explain it with one sentence, what exactly is this decoupling strategy? I mean, with your own words.
I wouldn't call it a decoupling strategy. I would call it a way to have your cake and eat it too. Mm-hmm. So yes, President Xi wants to create more domestic manufacturing and independence, so that China, if necessary, can more or less go it alone. Mm-hmm. But when they call it dual circulation, mm-hmm. it means that it's going to be a circulation around China, but also the other part of it is from outside as well. Yeah. So it is a plan to have your cake and eat it too.
Okay. Cool. Thank you very much. I think the buzzword is out there a lot, but I'm not sure everyone knows exactly what it means. So thank you for that. Yeah, so we're coming to the next part of the interview, which is the US-China summit in Alaska, which also I can imagine draws on these topics of like decoupling, coupling, circulation, and so on. More or less, it was about how do these two powers plan to deal with each other in the future. Can you tell us, what happened and what the outcomes are?
Okay, sure. I think it's in some ways too early to tell, but we know for a fact that there was much too much heat and not much light. Yeah. But it was critical that a high-level face-to-face meeting was held within 2 months of Biden and his team taking over from President Trump, a president who did so much to poison our bilateral relations with so little comprehension of the serious and dangerous confrontation he created. It's really clear that President Biden is under a tremendous domestic pressure, though, regarding China. Mm-hmm. It's about the only issue that Democrats and Republicans agree upon. I don't really worry about the fireworks that each side set off in public, because by all accounts, the private meetings were businesslike, informed, mm-hmm. and each side was able to present the other with the key issues. It's better than beating around the bush. And as the Chinese saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I was pleased that Secretary Blinken found issues where our national interests intersect: Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, and climate change. It's also a plus development that the Chinese side said afterwards that Sino-US working groups are being set up on the environment. Mm-hmm. In addition, both sides are going to work to remove joint irritants regarding media, diplomacy, and consulates. Mm-hmm. I was disappointed, however, that the issue of most immediate need, that's COVID-19 and global public health, didn't make the list, as our two nations are in the best position to lead this effort in a new model of great power relations, as President Xi and Obama provided in building the global consensus to enable the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. 15.
One thing that you just mentioned, the fact that there was no like mentioning of the COVID crisis, it does make sense because the whole COVID topic was literally absent also from the 14th five-year plan. So it seems like the Chinese government is very like happy to forget it and to push it away, the whole topic, at least in official planning, in official meetings, and so on. I think that if they mention it, it's to show that they were the winners or that they conquered it successfully, but it's not really part of the planning of the future. Is that true? Do you see that too?
I I think it in a way a part of the planning for the future because they can see how devastating this was to China initially and to the world still now.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely on the agenda, but I don't think it was at the front of the line. And it's not the first time that this has happened either, because experts have been telling us for years that coronavirus, some pandemic will happen. And that was especially after SARS. But no country really took it very seriously, it seems like. And what we're going through now is the unfortunate result. So I think it's in their mind, but hopefully China and other countries, for that matter, are going to make this a top line issue.
Okay. So yeah, back to the Alaska summit. I mean, it was quite a confrontation. I think we can all agree on that, especially in the beginning, the infamous beginning. And China was remarkably clear also on criticizing the US host and also criticizing the not really level playing field, criticizing the fact that the West thinks that it's the leader of the world or something along those lines. Yeah, what do you see there, like in respect to this confrontation between the world's two largest economies? I mean, that was quite a clash.
Yeah, it was certainly got people's attention, and it certainly warmed things up in Alaska, which was very cold at the time of the summit. But I think that it was important. Both sides, went in there kind of angry, and if anybody paid attention, especially to what Biden and his team had said since before the election, it's no surprise at all. But confrontation for its own sake isn't healthy.
Yeah.
But because confrontation without engagement could be lethal. So Blinken mentioned some of our major disagreements, economics, trade, and technology. But I think he also could have included other things like the new frontiers in economic competition and potentially in warfare like AI, cyberspace, and outer space as well.
Yeah.
We definitely need to resume the economic and strategic bilateral dialogues that occurred regularly in the Bush and Obama years, but which were eliminated by Trump. The closest the world ever came to nuclear annihilation, I'm old enough to remember it, was 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
In my opinion, today's dispute in the South and East China Seas, as well as Taiwan Strait, have an ever greater chance of triggering a war with weapons undreamed of a half century ago. I really especially worry about an accidental war that neither side intends. Albert Einstein was once asked what weapons would be used to fight World War III. He said he didn't know, but he was certain that World War IV would be fought with sticks and with stones.
Yeah.
But I believe Emi, he was overly optimistic. I don't think we'll be around if it comes to that.
So there is a real, like, I mean, we could all feel the cold climate, especially. I thought that at the summit in Alaska was very well placed. But I mean, given this consideration in the background of possible, let's maybe not say war, but of quite strong confrontation. Was there any like result in the summit that points to a more like I don't know, cooperative stance also? Are there any points where they agreed on, where we could say, okay, it was not super amicable, but at least they worked on something together, and it might, I mean, might get better in comparison, especially to the Trump administration, because I think that's what everybody was asking themselves, right?
Right. Yeah, sure. There are a few things. One of the major things that came out of this was that the climate change is something that's important to China and to US national interest as well as the world. So there's definitely going to be an effort. And it's important because the US and China were leaders in being able to push the Paris Climate Agreement over the finish line.
Yeah.
President Xi and Obama cooperated in 2016 on this, and in what was called a new model of great power relations. I think it's very important to try to go back to that cooperation because we are the two largest economies. Some people say that the US is still the largest economy, but the IMF likes to use the PPP measure, and by that measure, China is the largest economy. No matter, they're both the two largest ones. And so they really almost have a moral obligation to cooperate as opposed to zero sum themselves out. Yeah. Beyond the environment, there also was an agreement that some of the problems we had regarding consulates, journalists, and so on will be remedied in the very near future. I think those are confidence building measures that are very easy to accomplish, much more easy than about climate change, which is looking like a very, very serious and maybe even by now too late in the game problem to reverse.
Okay, thank you for your insight. So there's also a hopeful note in all of this, because especially climate change is the one topic that unites us all, especially nowadays. And we know that the Trump administration did quite some damage in that respect. So it's nice to know that the two administrations now are back on track. At least they share the same goal. That's already something we can be very, very glad about. So then moving to the European Union, what are your insights about the economic cooperation situation between the EU and the Chinese partners? So what is going on there if we look at these two blocks, if we want to call it like that?
I think on the positive side for Europe is that after 7 years of negotiations, China and the EU agreed on the comprehensive agreement on investment at the end of last year. If the draft is confirmed by the EU, which is far from a certainty, the CAI will promote bilateral trade, especially from EU to China. Mm-hmm. And in fact, according to the European Commission, the CAI will give EU investors an unprecedented level of access to China, including ensuring fair treatment for EU companies so they can compete on a more level playing field. This includes the treatment of SOEs, transparency of subsidies, and rules against forced technology transfer. So I think that that's very, very positive. Mm-hmm. I'm worried, though, that in the meetings that will be held this week, whether it's in the public readout or not, in the meetings between Biden, the NATO, EU, and Belgium, and so on, mm-hmm. that the US, which was not in favor of the EU signing the CAI, that the US is going to put a lot of pressure on the EU to march to the US tune. But you know what? Things have changed since 2016, and things have changed since Trump was in office. So now the EU has a more robust view of where it wants to go and what it wants to do. It's not going to take orders from the US to the same extent that it did before. And that's why I think it is a triangle between the US, the EU, and China if we're going to get anything done. internally, we all have to be more or less on the same page. And of course, it's going to take a lot of compromise, but that's the iron triangle of our age, I would say.
Yeah, totally. I read a very interesting like analysis of China expert Frank Siren, who said that China, like that the EU was a little bit like the child of two divorced parents, with the US being the mother and with China being the father. And somehow the European Union has to figure out, are they already mature enough to play their own role, or do they keep following the one parent and being like scared of the other? And you know, these we have these roles that the European Union has been playing for many decades now, of course, for good historical reasons, but it will be really interesting how this will play out also for this agreement, because it was a major milestone in the cooperation between the European Union and China. So yeah, let's see.
I think, this is interesting because I think there's still one other element to this, and that is the interplay between the EU and its member states. I mean, we think of the EU that it's becoming more and more of a solid bloc, but really it's more like the situation of the United States in its early history in the 18th century, where the states had more power than the central government. And I think this is a conundrum, a puzzle that's still being worked out. And how it's worked out will determine a lot about the future of the EU and the future of the world.
Okay, so let's hope it doesn't work like in the US with having to go through a civil war. Let's hope that won't happen. We're past that stage.
That's true. I hope so too.
Yeah, but I agree that there, of course, it's not a unified bloc, and there are many particular like many individual interests of the nation states, of course, that don't always overlap. So yeah,
and another thing is that our allies are not as allied with us as they used to be, because they could see how unreliable President Trump was and how he basically threw the allies under the bus, screamed at them, and asked for more money for common defense and things like that. So people wonder, because the Democrats hold on not only the presidency, but even more so on the Congress, is such that we could have Trump again, heaven forbid, in 2025, or somebody who's worse than Trump, somebody who has his same point of view, but is actually intelligent, somebody like Pompeo, and that we're going to get a real American wolf warrior back in 2025 who's going to finish the job of torpedoing alliances that America had since the end of World War II.
Okay. That's interesting that you should mention the wolf warrioring. There were lots of articles or comments about the Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy. So it's interesting to hear it, of course, also about the US, because it's more or less the same thing. How would you describe, if you look at the Chinese strategies for international cooperations, how would you describe their approach to diplomacy, and what plans can we see on the Chinese side?
Well, wolf warriors on both sides, they're shrill government officials. And I see them as a cross between braying jackasses and wolves howling into the wind. I think Shakespeare must have had in mind people like this when he wrote Macbeth, because he talked about people who were full of sound and fury, who signified nothing. And I believe that wolf warrioring is a strategy that we'll see to some extent maybe toned down during the next few years. But we will see a more assertive China, because China wants to basically get back to the greatness that it had for many hundreds or thousands of years in world history. And now they feel that they have the strength to go forward and not to be like a meek child being lectured to by a big parent. And so I think that's a lot of actually what sparked the fury in Alaska. And so we're going to see a much more assertive China. America hopes that it can get its allies together in line in a common formation of opposing, encircling China. And throughout Chinese history, the thing China's feared the most has been encirclement by outsiders that they still call barbarians.
Yeah.
And that's really a loaded term as well.
Okay. So yeah, we could see their wish for the level playing field, as we discussed before, this like statement that the West is not the leader of the world anymore and so on. So I really think that it's also from historical terms, it's going back to at least their perceived position, and also in ultimate terms, they used to be one of the most important countries or realms on the globe for many, many centuries. So I think that we can feel that again after.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I think that you're absolutely right, Emi, that China really feels it's coming into its own. A half century ago, Deng Xiaoping said that China should hide its strengths and bide its time. In other words, lie low.
Yeah.
But under the muscular rule of President Xi, China is well past that. And Xi's goal is achieving the Chinese dream. And the Chinese dream, people know the Chinese dream now, but they don't know what it is. And the Chinese dream is, as he says, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people. And you have to remember that, like I said a moment ago, China was an important world leader for centuries. And I can just tell you some statistics that bear this out, that on a per capita basis, aside from Italy, China was the wealthiest part of the world from the 1200s to the 1300s. And a little bit later in the 15th and 16th centuries, China accounted for 25% to 30% of the global economy. And recently, if you look at the same thing by PPP today, the China, US, and the EU each have about 16% of the global economy. And when you think that China had double that in hundreds of years ago, it puts this kind of thing in perspective. And China also talks about this century of humiliation where the great European powers basically weakened China and turned it from a strong empire into a weak and powerless entity in the course of a century that the Chinese call their century of humiliation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we can wait, like we can expect China to bounce back more or less. It's nothing very new, just as most of the plannings and most of the direction that the government is taking is not really new. I mean, most of this has been written into lots of statements and reports and agendas from the reform and opening. So nothing is really new. It's just that maybe now with Xi's assertive like demeanor, we start to listen because we have to. I think that's maybe.
Maybe. There are some downsides going forward in the future. Part of it depends on how aggressively the West confronts China, but China has its own internal problems. And the main problem that I see is this demographic time bomb. Like Japan, which is the poster child for demographic problems, China is going to be really much grayer in a few decades. And there won't be enough workers to support all the social programs. And we're not talking about, like here in Austria, we have 9.2 million people. We're talking about 1.4 billion people. And this is a big number. And throughout China's history, Chinese rulers have always been concerned about what they call the mandate of heaven.
Yeah.
So they want to know that the people who they rule are, if not happy with the rule, at least acquiesce to it. They want to promote order.
Yeah.
And something like this demographic time bomb will definitely, possibly explode that. And I believe that one of the reasons that China is trying to improve its economy is to avoid that. And I read recently that the China's per capita income is going to double in the near future, in the next decade or so. Maybe that will help. But there is also still a great misdistribution, misallocation of resources and riches and so on between urban and rural areas. This is the other big problem China has to confront.
Definitely, yeah. And now having come to economy also again, yeah, what are your insights into the trends of the Chinese politics when it comes to their economy, especially how can companies and also states deal with that? I mean, really, what can they do? How can they prepare? How can they react? What situation unfolds for them, and how can they adapt to this changing or not changing, bouncing back situation?
Well, everybody outside of China wants to get a piece of this huge
Yeah.
market. And the surprising fact is that China is very complicated. It's not easy. Chinese have done business for millennia. It's almost in their DNA. And so, in trying to grab a piece of this market, many savvy companies, foreign companies, had to leave, withdraw from China because they were blinded either by their own arrogance or the lack of care in the face of China, which is a developing country still, and which has a developing legal system, to be diplomatic. So you have to really think like it's a three-dimensional chess game almost in doing business with China because it's such a complicated place. I guess the advantage that foreign companies have these days is that in part they have the experience of their clients getting burned. And so you have a experienced group of consultants and lawyers and accountants who can help foreign companies out. But the worst thing a foreign company could do is to think that they know more than the Chinese or can outsmart the Chinese or can go around what they think other people had to endure. It's a recipe for a disaster and for losing not only face, but losing lots and lots of money and lots of opportunities.
Yeah. So yeah, I have the same like experience working with companies. I oftentimes see that they are not really prepared for the Chinese strategies that are very relevant to their field of business, or also to the whole ecosystem that awaits them there, even if they have been working there already for several decades, because things are changing really fast at the moment in China, also for companies who have already been there. What is a suggestion to companies deciding to work in China now? I mean, you said to be prepared. How can you prepare? I mean, many companies tell me that it's so confusing, everything. China is like a black box, is a picture that is oftentimes used. What would be the best preparation to get an overview of all these developments?
Well, I think that the companies are aware, most of them, that it is a complex place. And the environment is changing. So we have the CAI. And so the CAI should make it easier. But the CAI is a work in progress and it may not be approved. It probably won't be approved in its current form and will require more negotiation and amendment. There's a lot about the CAI that we don't even know. It is like what you said, a black box. So in a way, we have to wait and see what the Europeans and the Chinese negotiated in this regard. I think it's a good sign for the future that there's going to be a further opening, but we don't know exactly. So I have to say to be careful and to consult with excellent resources and to move as carefully as you can with having to move quickly and to get very good advice and not to rely on experience that you've had anywhere else in the world, because China is not like anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I often hear also from companies after they make the experience.
Yeah,
Which is
it's a little
tragic.
too late then.
Which is
Yeah,
tragic.
they've
We would,
lost their money.
yeah, we would like not only companies, but also states, like in general, players or stakeholders. It would be perfect if they were prepared better for this cooperation, have a better overview of the whole thing. So let's come to the last question, last but not least. So, what do you see as the most important trends, main cooperation points you see between the two in the next years? But also, I would really like to stress that because now we had so much also like speculative and negative things. What can we learn from China? So, what are the trends for the next years, and what can we also learn from China?
Well, I think we have to watch this dual circulation model and how it's going to work, because right now there's a lot of room for foreign companies as part of this dual circulation between domestic consumption and domestic production with the added overlay of the foreign production as well.
Yes.
But I think increasingly China is going to become domestically much more self-contained. And you have to remember that the Great Wall was built to keep barbarians out, and that China's historic fear was being encircled. And there's good reason to think that some countries are now trying to encircle China. But on the other hand, there are opportunities. Chinese consumers, for example, love foreign brands, and their demand for foreign luxury goods is growing both inexorably and dramatically. So I would say that branding, which the Chinese don't have a good handle on yet, but they're getting it, branding is very important. So if foreign companies, especially European, American, Japanese ones, can build their brands cleverly in China, that they'll have a leg up on their competition. And I know that one strategy that a lot of foreign luxury companies are using are partnering with museums and cultural organizations to bring together Chinese history and culture together with the history and culture of a luxury brand. And I think that's a good strategy. And I have to say that there has to be very good marketing. And another mistake that foreign companies have made is not being sensitive to Chinese culture and doing advertising which unintentionally insults China or makes people in China lose face. So it's very important to make sure that everything you do is culturally okay in China, and that there's no hidden meanings or double entendres there that are going to get you in big trouble with Chinese consumers, with Chinese internet, with Chinese social media, and worst of all, with Chinese government.
Yeah, definitely. And with the corporate social responsibility system in between as the system that records all of these wrongdoings, possibly. Okay.
Right.
So,
yeah, right, exactly.
yeah. So, yeah, one thing we can learn from China, and that's like my last input, maybe you have an opinion on that. I mean, it's all over the place. We can learn from China, at least from my perspective, all in this whole realm of e-mobility, digital innovation, emerging technologies, and so on. So I would like to finish this talk that has had some very grave topics as well, of course, with also this outlook of that there are a lot of developments in China that are very, very positive because of their specifics of their ecosystem. They have more possibility to explore and do trial and errors, of course. And this is something we can really learn from. I mean, this innovation, this spirit of let's just try it out, even if the app is not finished, let's just do it anyway. That's really like something we could grab onto and also get some kind of rejuvenation. You were saying that about the Chinese plans, but I can also see like possibilities for a rejuvenation of the European infrastructure, for example, with the Belt and Road or the European tech market and so on. Do you agree? Or I don't know. I think this is some very positive point also about the whole situation at the moment.
I agree, but I think that what it's going to take is not only determination, but a lot of money.
Mhm.
So the West has not shown a willingness, especially US and EU, to invest in those STEM subjects, the high-tech subjects, because they're going to need that. And China's been doing that for decades now, and it's starting to show. And that's why China, for the last 2 years, has filed more intellectual property applications, patents especially, with the UN than any other country. The US used to be the first, but now for 2 years in a row, China is the first, and it's growing. And it's because of companies like, I know they're demonized, maybe they shouldn't be, but Huawei has the bulk of those patents because it's a national champion that's innovating like crazy. I think we have to match this in the West and create our own national and international champions, because a lot of pretty words and nice summit meetings are not, or even not nice summit meetings, are not going to make it. You need to fund this, and you need to have not only a 5-year plan, but a next generation plan, or we're going to fall further behind.
Okay. Yeah, I strongly agree. Maybe we could take the Chinese example of the century plans. They like to do that, to plan for a whole century or at least one generation. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm done with my questions. If you want to add anything, Harvey, you're most welcome. I really enjoyed your insights.
No, only that I very much admire you and your work. And also, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share some thoughts. And I think that for people who haven't been to China, when things get normal in the next year, let's say, in terms of being able to travel in both directions safely, people should go there. People should meet Chinese, and Chinese actually need to meet more of us. We need more people-to-people exchanges, because it's important to know each other and to get to know each other as best that we can. And if we don't do that, I don't believe there's much of a future for mankind.
Okay. So let's hope that, for example, the next Winter Olympics will be a possibility already for everybody to travel. I'm thinking of Austrians and winter sports. That would be a nice opportunity, a nice topic that most of people can relate to. And thank you again, Harvey. Thank you very much for your insight and for this discussion. It was really pleasant and I enjoyed it very, very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Emi, for the great questions and the great opportunity. I am very pleased to share my views with people, and I hope that it'll inspire people to engage with China and to encourage China to engage with them.
I'm very sure about that. Thank you.